All right, back in open court. Mr. Goldberg, you had a comment about the videotape?
Thank you, Your Honor. We wanted to lodge another objection to the playing of the tape that was discussed on Thursday, depicting the item that the defense contends may be the glove. And the basis of this objection was not discovered until quite recently, in fact, last night, and is stated in a declaration that we just filed with the court of a videotape engineer who took a look at this video. I'm not sure that I can, I hope I'm not misstating what's in the declaration because I don't understand all the technical jargon, but apparently most news organizations shoot their tapes on beta, and what we have is a VHS tape, and the clarity of the beta tape is apparently much greater than with a VHS tape. So there is a best evidence rule objection in the sense that we have been provided with what is a copy that is not as good and would not have the same resolution as the original. Therefore, we have two requests that we'd ask. Number one, that if the defense has the beta version, they should be required to play that or utilize that if they are going to use this tape. If they don't have it, then they have to make a showing under the best evidence rule as to why they don't and why it's not available. And if the court is inclined somehow to, if they can make such a showing, the prosecution should be entitled to get the information from the defense as to where the tape came from. So hopefully we can track down the beta version. Also, apparently, it's easier to enhance a beta tape than the VHS tape, which is, I think, also stated in this declaration.
All right, Mr. Scheck.
Your Honor, we gave over to the court the original VHS copy that we have, so we don't have any beta tapes. It doesn't indicate that the prosecution knows for sure that there is an original beta tape. Obviously, as I indicated to the court the other day, from our position...
Yeah, but no commercial video enterprise uses VHS as the original format.
No, the court...
Which has always made me wonder why VHS beat out beta, but that's another story.
But we don't have it, that's the point. And this is the best copy that we have, and we think we should be allowed to offer it under the best evidence rule for that purpose. And as I indicated to the court before...
Do you know which news organization this copy came from?
Gee, I don't. And as a matter of fact, there are two versions of this, as I indicated on the big compilations. One that has the counter on it, and the other one that does not. And one of them, I even think, may even have a little logo in it indicating one of the networks. But our position is simply that this is the best we have. We've turned over the best copy we have to the prosecutors, and with respect to these tapes and all other tapes of how collection was done at the crime scene, we would join with the prosecution, I'm sure, in asking the news organizations to turn over. I made this plea before. Everything. I mean, they don't. They won't give us outtakes, but everything they have, the best versions that we have, because we're not interested in misleading anybody. We looked at the tape. We saw what we saw. That's the best we can do.
All right. Mr. Goldberg, any response to that?
Well, under the rule, the best evidence rule, you are allowed, generally speaking, to introduce a copy instead of the original, but you generally have to make a showing that you don't have the original and why you don't have it. Now counsel apparently have compiled these clippings from news organizations. They got them in some manner, in some way. They didn't just simply materialize in the offices of the defense in this case. We are entitled to know if they are going to use a copy. At the very least, we are entitled to know and have a representation as to precisely where they came from and how they were compiled, so that the people, at the very least, can be permitted the option of then trying to track down the beta version of this tape.
All right. Mr. Scheck, can you provide us with the source of this clip? Well, let me ask you this, Mr. Scheck. Is that information available somewhere in the defense team where it came from? This clip?
We would have to sit, what we did is put all of them together, and we'd have to sit down and disaggregate them and look at them and try to make our best estimation going back through all the records. But we went through this before in putting these clips together for the court and for the district attorney. They've had it for months. They were looking at the same
No,
thing
the
I was
fact that
looking
they
at.
have it is one thing. Where it came from, the source of that, is another question.
I understand. I mean,
Can you make that information available to them by tomorrow morning?
I think I better defer to Mr. Cochran.
No, you're handling this part,
Oh, I'm
Mr.
handling
Scheck. Simple question. Can you make that information available to them?
If we had it, we'll make our best efforts to find out exactly where we got all this, and
All right.
we'll tell them. But I can certainly represent to the court that we gave you the best copy we had. That is the best copy we had. That's the only one available to us. And if the news organizations want to make more available, that would be terrific, but I think we satisfy the best evidence rule just on the face of it, because this is the best
Right.
available copy.
Ms. Hazlett, would you make an inquiry of the news organizations, and if anybody recognizes this videotape as their product that they turned over, we'd like to see the original beta format. All right, the objection's overruled. Let's have the jury, please. Panel. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Trust you're all feeling well today. Here we had a good dinner last night. Good. All right. Record to reflect Mr. Dennis Fung is on the witness stand again. Mr. Fung, good morning, sir.
Good morning.
You reminded you were still under oath, sir. And Mr. Scheck, you may resume and complete your cross-examination.
I'll make my best effort.
Thank you, sir. You have the morning.
I'm sorry?
You have the morning.
Oh, I'm sure I'll be into the afternoon.
Right.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Morning, Mr. Fung. How are you, sir?
Morning.
When we left, if we were discussing the glove at Bundy, you recall that?
Yes.
All right, and just to review a little bit, Mr. Harris, could you put up the... I'd like to show you on the screen, you recall seeing these pictures before of the Bundy glove.
Yes.
All right, and Mr. Scheck, which defense exhibit, this side by side, which one is this? Is this 1075?
1075.
All right.
Now, Mr. Fung, if we could look at the picture to the right, the one with the finger pointing at the glove. You see that, sir?
Yes, I do.
All right. Why don't we designate that position number one? Fair enough?
Yes.
All right. And let's look at the left, and that's the picture with the evidence tag, correct?
Yes.
And why don't we designate that position number two? Okay?
Yes.
Now, turning to position number one, you remember I showed you that photograph last Thursday and asked you if you had seen it in the grand jury. Remember that?
I remember that.
All right. And you indicated that you didn't think you had.
I indicated that I didn't remember seeing it.
Right. And have you since then gone back, spoken with the district attorneys, looked at the grand jury exhibit and refreshed your recollection?
Yes.
And you did, in fact, see that photograph in the grand jury, didn't you?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so those are the two positions from which you saw the glove in photographs. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, before we left On Thursday afternoon, just as we broke, you were shown a videotape, were you not?
Yes.
All right, 3 different segments. I would ask now, Your Honor, that Mr. Harris be permitted to play those.
Yes. Have we marked that yet? Next in order, 1078.
Is there let me approach, Your Honor, and I don't know if this will work, but
I don't think the pointer is going to, do you have the laser?
okay.
And be careful where you point that. All right. Mr. Harris.
Now, do you recognize this as a picture of Detective Van Adder walking up?
I can't identify who that person is.
Okay. Now, do you see the object that I'm circling with this light pen?
I object as soon as it's back on evidence that it is an object.
Overruled.
Do you see that?
I see a dark spot on the
Okay.
video, yes.
Would you agree that that looks to be brown?
Your Honor, it's irrelevant what you think is the best evidence.
Overruled.
To me, it just appears dark.
Does it
I
look
don't see any brown color there.
Does it appear to be three-dimensional to you?
Irrelevant.
Overruled.
I can't determine from the video if it is or not.
Okay. You see that object again now that I'm circling with the light pen?
I see a dark area that you're
All right.
circling.
In
All
your
right, this-
view?
For the record, this is a second clip segment.
Yes. Does that, we're stopping that now. Again, does that appear to you to be brown and three-dimensional?
Appears to be a dark area on the video.
You wouldn't say it's three-dimensional?
I couldn't tell from the video, no.
Okay.
All right, segment 3.
Now, this appears to be you putting down evidence tags, correct?
Yes.
All right. And you still see that same object that I'm pointing to in the light pen? You saw that?
Go do it again.
All right. Do we run that again? Now, let me show you a still of that shot. Again, looking at that, would you agree, or do you agree, that that looks to be a brown three-dimensional object?
Appears to be a dark object or a dark area on the video.
Now, if
that
that,
Segment 3.
segment 3. Now, if that were the glove, Mr. Fung, that would be a third position, would it not?
Your Honor, that calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Well, when we broke from court on Thursday, you came back the next morning, is that correct? And it was Wednesday, actually. Thursday. Came back to court the next morning, correct?
Yes.
All right. Now, that evening, did you look at these videotapes with great care?
The Wednesday evening?
Yeah.
Yes, I did look at them.
All right. And with whom did you look at them?
There were other people in the office. I don't recall all of them.
About how many times do you think you looked at them that evening?
20.
Then when you came down the next morning in court, you reviewed them again, did you not, on these monitors?
When I came down in court the next day, there was an enhanced version, and I looked at them here, yes.
And you reviewed it with Mr. Goldberg?
What do you mean reviewed?
Well, you were looking at the tapes from various angles and photographs with Mr. Goldberg,
Yes.
with Ms. Clark.
She was present.
She wasn't sitting by the monitor with you looking at it?
She may have been, but
Mr. Harmon,
yes.
Mr. George Clark,
Yes.
Mr. Darden,
I don't recall if Mr. Darden was here or not.
the gentleman Jonathan Fartlow from Decision
Fartlow.
Quest?
Fairtlow.
Fairtlow, I'm sorry.
Yes.
You looked at it in slow motion.
Yes.
You examined various photographs.
Yes.
Now, were you shown I have this photograph marked defendants next in order.
1079. Yes, 1079. Have you shown that to counsel? Have you shown that to counsel?
Yes.
Mrs. Robertson's defense is marking 1079 a photograph.
Your Honor, I think this was already marked for the record.
There appears to be a sticker on the back. Is that evidence?
Yeah, that's a defendant sticker for the,
Right.
were you shown, among others, that photograph?
Yes.
Commissioner, I'd like to put this on the Elmo.
Yes.
Now, was it suggested to you after seeing this picture that that object on the videotape that you will not agree with me is brown and three-dimensional was not really the glove, but was green or yellow leaves?
Your Honor, that's already entered.
Sustained.
Did anybody show you this picture and suggest to you that what was on the videotape was not the glove in a third position, but green and yellow leaves?
Nobody made that suggestion to me. They asked me to look at the videotape and look at different photographs.
Well, was there any discussion? It's not the glove, it's green and yellow leaves.
Nobody said that, no.
Yep. It couldn't be green and yellow leaves, wouldn't you agree with Mr. Fung?
Excuse me?
That calls for an expert opinion.
Overruled.
What we saw on that videotape, that object you and I were discussing, the one that you will not agree is brown and three-dimensional, would you not agree with me
Why
that...
don't you rephrase that question, counsel?
All right. Would you agree that the object that we saw on the videotape could not be those green and yellow leaves?
I can't agree to that, no.
You think it could be?
Could be what?
Green and yellow leaves.
From the angle and the distance of that camera and from the poor resolution of the videotape itself, I can't make that determination.
Okay. You noticed in the photograph that, in the videotape, that the object had a little white tag in it, didn't you? Or a little white spot?
In the state's testimony about
Sustained.
Now, did you read the next day Detective Lang quoted in the Los Angeles Times about what he thought that object was?
I haven't read the LA Times for over a week.
I understand.
Overruled.
Now, did you speak about what this object could be on the videotape with Detective Lang?
I don't think there was any discussion, no. He was present during some portion of the watching.
Well, did Detective Lang ever tell you that that object on the videotape was not the glove? It was actually the dark blood by the blanket that somehow was changed by the angle of the lens, and that's how it could be explained? You say something like that to you?
Not to me, no. I did overhear something like that.
Well, who suggested that one to you?
That was never suggested to me directly.
Well, how did you hear about it indirectly?
I was in a different area and I overheard that comment.
Now, you know that that object on the videotape can't be explained away by any of these things, don't you?
Your Honor, it's hard to answer.
Sustained.
You know it's the glove, don't you?
I don't know that.
You know it's the glove, and you just got caught by this videotape, isn't that right?
Your Honor, that's hard.
Sustained.
All right, Mr. Fung, why don't we talk about the envelope for a minute? Taken two previously marked exhibits and we're putting them side by side and showing them to council.
All right, which exhibits are these?
One of them is 1079, the one we just marked, and the other one is the overall picture of Detective Furman pointing to the glove in the envelope as we're searching for that number. Showing it to counsel on his monitor before we display it to the jury.
But I need to have an exhibit number.
Yes.
Your Honor, I'll object to cropping the photograph in any way or altering its appearance on the display.
Yes, the one on the left, Your Honor, is 55, 1055.
All right, the objection's overruled.
All right.
It's not an unfair depiction as to the position of the items.
We should have this side by side of the envelope marked as defendants.
1080.
1080. Mr. Fung, you see these two photographs, do you not?
Yes.
All right. Now, looking on the left, that's a closer-up shot of Detective Furman pointing towards the glove hat and with his hand over the envelope, correct?
Yes.
All right. And you see where the envelope is in terms of the tiles.
Yes.
All right. Now, looking at the photograph to the right, that's the envelope in the position where you put down tags and had it photographed, correct?
Yes.
All right. And it's in a different position, is it not, from the photograph where Detective Perman is pointing in the direction of the envelope?
It appears to be yes.
About how far down do you think that's been moved?
As which to which?
All right, the photograph where, to the right, where you put down the evidence tags, that's about how many inches would you estimate moved back towards the railing from the way it's depicted in the photograph where Detective Furman is pointing towards it?
Appears to be moved 3 to 4 inches towards the west.
Right, and the difference, another difference between the photographs is that in the one where you had the picture taken with the evidence tag down, there's more, you can see drag marks in the upper right-hand corner of that picture, can you not?
I can't tell from the video, but
Well, do you recall seeing what looked like streaks of blood in the soil in the area where Mr. Goldman's body had been removed?
yes,
All right, would you agree with me that that represents track marks of Mr. Goldman's body being removed and dragged through the area where the glove hat and the envelope were?
Call's perspective.
Sustain.
Well, there's more leafy foliage on top of those tiles, is there not, in the picture where you had the photograph taken?
yes,
Now, Mr. Fung, would you agree that the envelope is in two different positions here?
yes,
And is it clear to you, sir, that that envelope was moved and put into a new position after Mr. Goldman's body was removed from the scene?
Call's for speculation.
Sustain.
When did you first learn that the envelope had been moved from its original condition as it was found at the crime scene?
Irrelevant. Call's for hearsay.
Overruled.
First I heard about it was during the trial,
When?
this trial,
When during the trial? We've been here for a while.
when, you're right, when Detective Lang was giving testimony.
About a month ago, 2 months ago?
Whenever he was giving testimony.
And isn't it your responsibility? Well, how did you learn about that? Did you speak to Detective Lang?
How did I learn that?
Yeah, that the envelope had been moved?
I overheard it on the radio.
And you, in other words, you were overhearing the testimony on the radio?
Yes.
And how often have you been doing that, sir?
The testimony is playing all the time in different parts of the office, and people have it on all the time, and when I pass by, I overhear portions of it.
When you're working in some place, do you ask them to turn it off?
Sometimes, yes.
Sometimes you don't?
Sometimes I'm not there long enough to ask them to do it.
Now, Mr. Fung, isn't it your responsibility to investigate whether evidence at the crime scene has been moved or altered from its original position?
A was to the word investigate.
Overruled.
I in some respects, it is my responsibility, yes.
All right. And you're supposed to make inquiries of people at the scene as to whether or not evidence has been moved or altered.
Yes,
And did you ask Detective Lang if he saw evidence moved or altered, that somebody had seen the envelope and the glove moved and replaced back in a new position? Did you ask him about that on June 13th?
I don't recall if I did or not.
Well, when you say you don't recall, are you telling us that you might have?
Yes.
Did you ask Mr. Rokar, the photographer, whether he had seen any evidence moved and then replaced back to a new position?
I did not ask that of Mr. Rokar.
Did you ask Detective Phillips?
Oh,
No. You saw Detective Phillips at the scene when Mr. Goldman's body was being removed through the area where the envelope, the hat, and the glove were. He was there.
I did not know Detective Phillips, and he was not the officer in charge at the scene.
All right. Did you ask Steve Johnson, the chief forensic chemist,
About,
if he had seen any of the evidence moved and then replaced back into a new position?
no.
He was there, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
Did you ask Miss Ratcliffe, the representative from the coroner's office?
I did not speak with Ms. Ratcliffe.
Did you ask Mr. Jacobo from the coroner's office?
Same question?
Yeah.
No.
Weren't they people in an excellent position to see whether or not the envelope, the hat, or the glove had been moved, since they were the ones that were involved in removing Mr. Goldman's body?
sustained.
Well, you did see Mr. Ratcliffe, Miss Ratcliffe, and Mr. Jacobo removing Mr. Goldman's body,
Yes, I did.
but you did not ask them, after that had been done, whether they had seen any of the evidence moved.
Sustained.
Did you ask? Well, I think you've answered. There were representatives of SID who do fingerprinting at the scene, were there not?
Yes.
And they were standing on the top of the walkway, were they not?
During certain portions, yes.
And that was during the portion of time where Mr. Goldman's body was being removed. They were up there.
I don't recall when they were there.
Well, did you inquire of them as to whether or not they had seen any evidence? The envelope, the hat, or the glove moved?
No.
Did you ask Andrea Mazzola whether she had seen it?
Seen anything moved?
Yeah.
I did not ask her that.
Did you ask Andrea Mazzola to conduct an inquiry about whether any evidence had been moved?
No.
Is it your testimony, sir, that on June 13th, you did not suspect that the glove or the envelope or any other evidence in that area had been moved from their original position?
Overruled.
I did not suspect that they were moved.
Is it your testimony that you had no knowledge whatsoever on June 13th that that glove and the envelope had been moved and somebody put it back in its original position?
Sustained.
You have to fill out a crime scene checklist report, you and Ms. Mazzola, correct?
Yes.
And you filled it out in this case with respect to the Bundy location?
Yes.
And one of the things that you have to check off on your crime scene checklist report is, has the scene been altered? If so, by whom and how?
Yes.
All right? Ask that this page be marked defendants 1081.
1081. 1081.
Is this a copy of page 2 of your Bundy crime scene checklist report?
Yes, it is.
All right. I'd like to put this on the memo, Your Honor.
Yes. Mr. Harris?
Now, what we see on the Elmo, go back a little. Okay. We see on the Elmo is that question that you have to fill out, has the scene been altered? If so, by whom and how? Correct?
That's what it says.
And if the scene has been altered, there's 1, 2, 3 lines for you to write in what happened, right?
Yes.
That's because it's considered very important that the criminalist document whether or not the scene has been altered from its original condition.
What do you mean by very important?
Well, it's important enough to have at least 3 lines on this checklist report to make sure you fill it out if you discover or you suspect that the scene has been altered.
Or will-
Do you understand my
That
question, sir?
space is provided if there is, for instances when items are altered, such as, well, there are certain scenes that are very altered, and just make note of them.
This one was just a little altered.
Sustained.
Well, on this box, is there not a question mark?
Yes, there is.
Did you put that in there?
No.
Did Ms. Mazzola put that in there to your knowledge?
Yes.
And that was put in there because you and she suspected that this scene had been altered from the way it was originally found.
Sustained. It's also cumulative.
I'm sorry?
It's also cumulative. You and she.
Did you discuss with Ms. Mazzola why she put a question mark in that box?
I think she asked me what to put in that box, and I said, put a question mark there.
And you said put a question mark there because you knew that when Mr. Goldman's body had been dragged through the evidence, that the glove had been moved, the envelope had been moved, and somebody put it back into the place where they thought it was originally.
No,
Isn't that right?
that's wrong.
Now, Mr. Fung, you have described 2 methods for collecting items that contain possible biological material other than blood drops.
Excuse me? Could you repeat that?
Well, have you told us that there are 2 methods that you use to collect items at a crime scene other than blood drops? One involving gloves.
Yes.
All right, that's where you would pick up the item wearing gloves and put it into a bag, for example.
Yes.
And the second method that you described for us is something that you call the scoop technique.
Yes.
And the scoop technique is a method where you take a card or a pencil and you scoop the object into a bag.
Yes.
And when you do the scoop technique, you do not touch the object with your bare hands.
That's correct.
And when you're collecting any item that could later be dusted for fingerprints, you would certainly not touch that item with your bare hands.
When I,
Yes. You want me to repeat that?
yes.
All right. When you are collecting an item which could contain fingerprints from the perpetrator or perpetrators of a crime, you would not touch that item with your bare hand, would you, when collecting it?
I would try not to.
Well, you say you try not to. It would be wrong to do that, wouldn't it?
If it was for prints, yes.
And in this case, the envelope that we saw, it's found at Bundy, that contained the prescription glasses, it had blood spatter on it.
Is that a question?
Yeah.
I didn't look at
You didn't notice
I didn't look at the glasses that closely.
the envelope?
I looked at the envelope.
I'm asking about the envelope. Did the envelope that contained the prescription glasses have blood spatter on it?
There was a blood pattern on it.
And it had shoe impressions on it, did it not?
I don't recall, but I do remember there was some type of blood on the envelope.
You don't recall that it had shoe impressions on it?
I don't recall that.
Overruled.
Do you recall that the envelope was torn at the top?
No.
Did it occur to you that one of the killers could have mistakenly believed that something other than glasses was in that envelope and grabbed for it?
Calls for speculation sustained.
When you were at the crime scene on June 13th, were you interested in the possibility that one of the killers could have grabbed or pulled at that envelope and touched it while struggling with Mr. Goldman?
Irrelevant, assumes facts, not evidence, calls for speculation.
Sustained.
When you were at the crime scene on June 13th and you saw that envelope, did you consider the possibility that the envelope might have fingerprints on it from one of the killers?
Irrelevant, calls for speculation.
Overruled.
Assumes facts, not evidence, also irrelevant.
Overruled.
Your Honor, can the court repeat the question?
Killer or killers?
Killer or killers?
Killer or killers, it could have had fingerprints on the, there could have been fingerprints on the envelope.
And you thought about that then?
Yes.
Did you touch that envelope with your bare hands while collecting it, Mr. Fung?
No.
Sure of that?
Yes.
No question about it in your mind?
Yes.
Do you recall Andrea Mazzola kneeling on the ground and passing you that envelope, which you grasped with an ungloved bare hand?
No, I don't.
Your Honor, I'd like to show the prosecution some videotape.
Have you seen this already?
Yes, it is on their tape, Your Honor, but I'm not sure that they necessarily
How
have
long
seen
is the
it.
clip?
Oh,
3 or 4 seconds.
All right. Show it to counsel.
we're going to show it. Your Honor, my suggestion is that we show it a few times and show it in slow motion.
Show it to counsel first, please.
Mr. Harris, why don't you show them the still that we'll show next? Your Honor, this is on the tape that's been provided to the court and the district attorney.
Your Honor, I ask that all counsel's comments be stricken. Those aren't proper.
Overruled. All right, councils have the opportunity. I thought we had an agreement, however, that we'd show each other these things before we start the session. All right, let's proceed.
Your Honor, with permission, I'd like to show this particular clip 3 or 4 times, once in slow motion and then the still.
All right, we're going to mark this as defense 1082.
Mr. Fung, I'd like you to watch this tape and very, very carefully with the jury. We're going to show it to you 3 or 4 times in real time, then we'll show it to you in slow motion, and then we'll show you a still. All right, let's show it again in real time. Show it again in real time. Can we show it now in slow motion? You want to see that again in slow motion, Mr. Fung?
I don't need to see it in slow
All right.
motion.
Could we now show a still? Mr. Fung, that's you getting the prescription envelope from Andrea Mazzola and grasping it in your bare hands, isn't it?
No, it's not.
Well, what is that, Mr. Fung?
Could be any number of things.
That is not you, is not Ms. Mazzola in the position where the envelope was on the ground?
Calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Is she in that area?
She is, I can't tell from this clip where exactly we were.
You can't tell that you're, from this clip, that you're at the Bundy location in the area where the envelope was seen on the photographs?
I don't know that's exactly where we were, no.
You're not in and around that area, no?
We may have been around that area, but
If that's not you grasping the envelope with the prescription glasses with your bare hands, what, pray tell, is it?
if, we can always have the envelope printed, and if my fingerprints are on there, then it is. But I know that my
That's not
fingerprints
you.
are not on that envelope.
That's not you grasping it with your bare hand.
That's correct.
I'm going to go about another 15.
Your Honor, can we have the envelope produced?
Which number is that, Mr. Scheck? Mrs. Robertson, do you know the number?
May I approach?
You may.
Mr. Fung, can you see that envelope in the bag?
Yes.
Now, the other items of evidence that you collected in the Bundy scene, weren't they put into coin envelopes if they were blood drops?
Yes.
And pager was put into a bag? Why don't you take out your evidence collection sheet and read along with me? The keys went into a coin envelope, correct?
Yes.
The pager went into a coin envelope.
Yes.
That object we see you and Miss Mazzola handling, it's not the keys of the pager, is it?
No.
It's not the glove.
No.
It's not the hat.
No.
It's not the ring.
No.
It's not any of the red stains that you recovered at Bundy.
That's correct.
Well, looking at your evidence checklist, can you suggest one thing other than that envelope that we saw in that videotape?
Notepad, maybe?
A notepad? Which notepad?
It wouldn't be evidence. It would be something that we used to take notes.
And for the record, Mr. Scheck, what are we doing?
We're looking at it 3 more times.
This is 1082.
still. Looking at that still, and here, if you want, we have a printout in yellow. Are you telling us that that's a notepad and not the envelope?
I'm saying it could be anything, but it's not the envelope here.
Well, would you agree that it's not any other item of evidence that you collected at the scene? Couldn't be any other item of evidence except for that prescription envelope, right?
Well, wait a minute, I object.
Basis?
This argument that it was used as an
Sustain.
Is there any other item of evidence that you collected at Bundy that you could be handling at that time with Ms. Mazzola?
same objection.
Overruled.
I don't know what time frame this still was taken, so I can't give you an accurate.
That is a
Assumption.
picture of Mr. Jacobo and Miss Ratcliffe.
Okay?
They're from the coroner's office.
Right.
Now counsel's testifying motion.
That's true. Rephrase the question.
Are they from the coroner's office?
Yes.
And they were at the scene when you arrived,
Yes.
and they left at about 11:15, as I recall?
Right.
So it's got to be between the time that you first arrived at the scene and the time that the coroners left.
Yes.
Are you testifying that that's not the envelope?
It's argumentative.
Sustain.
Mr. Harris advised me perhaps we could play it one more time in slow motion, and he thinks he can get her better still.
I think we need to start the slow-mo sooner than that.
It's kind of quick to catch this.
We'll start the slow-mo at the beginning. All right, we're going backwards at this point.
Okay, that's a good one, if you can get that.
How about some more? No, backwards, backwards, backwards.
There. There. How about that, Mr. Fung?
Is that a question, Mr. Scheck?
Yes. How about that picture, Mr. Fung? Does that refresh your recollection that you took the envelope from Andrea Mazzola with your bare hand?
When you pointed out the time frame, it makes it even more sure in my mind that that is not the envelope, because we did not start picking up envelope or evidence until well after the coroners were gone.
Cap, do you have that frame? All right. 82A printout.
That's a notepad.
I'm saying I'm not sure what it is, but I know it's not that envelope.
Do you see where there's a slight, that object that Ms. Mazzola had in her hand, it appears to have a certain fullness to it?
I can't tell from the
Can't
video,
tell?
no.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, rather than have the jury touch it, but I would ask that this bag that contains the envelope be passed to the jury so they can look at it.
All right, hand it to jury number one, please.
The latest still be marked as defendants 1082A, and I asked that this also be passed to the jury.
I thought we did that already.
No, not this still, the new one.
Excuse me, counsel? You need my permission before you hand something to any juror.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you said yes. My apologies.
Nope. Nope. Let me see it first.
My apologies.
Welcome to California. There. Ask me for the number. He didn't ask me directly and clearly for permission to hand it to the jury, Mr. Cochran. Well, then I didn't hear it. All right, Deputy Russell, would you transmit that back to the clerk? Mr. Scheck? Do you collect that from Deputy Russell? Scheck, would you collect that from Deputy Russell, please? All right, would this be an appropriate place to break? I need to change court reporters. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a brief recess. Please remember all my admonitions to you. Don't discuss the case amongst yourselves. Don't form any opinions about the case. Do not allow anybody to communicate with you. With regard to the case, do not conduct any deliberations till the matter has been submitted to you. We'll take a 15-minute recess. Thank you. Inspector, just court and counsel. All right, is that the complete? All right, let me see counsel sidebar again.
Could we at least be given the opportunity to take a closer look at this?
Sure, view it one more time.
few moments ago, Mr. Fung, when you saw the video of the envelope, you said that it had refreshed your recollection when you looked at the frame because you knew that couldn't be the envelope since the evidence collection did not begin until the people from the coroner's office left.
That's what I indicated, yes.
All right. I'd like to show you this piece of videotape, Mr. Fung.
All right, we'll mark this as 1083.
And you've been watching this in the break, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
Now, this is Miss Mazzola putting the hat in the bag, correct?
Yes.
And if you look in the back of the steps, those are the print people walking back and forth. One is in the white coats.
Yes.
And you see in back of her what looks like the tape measure.
I couldn't make it out.
See it now?
Yes. Could be, yes.
Now she's picking up the glove. Now, you remember that Mr. Jacobo from the coroner's office, he was the gentleman in the blue suit, the blue jumpsuit.
Yes.
I'd like you to watch very carefully in the frame these shoes. See those shoes? See that those blue pants?
Yes.
That's Mr. Jacobo, isn't it?
Appears to be, yes.
So you did begin evidence collection before the coroners left.
Yes.
So what you said before wasn't true.
It was to the best of my recollection at the time.
Well, when you filled out your evidence collection report, Mr. Fung, for the Bundy scene, I think we've been through this before, there's a box that has times on it, right?
Yes.
And you didn't fill out any times for the collection of any of these pieces of evidence, did you?
They were not filled in.
I think we'll just print out the last still of the shoes. Can you
All
do
right, 1083A.
Thank you. Mr. Fung, why don't we move on to the issue of DNA and your knowledge of it. I believe you said during cross-examination that you were not a DNA person.
Something relative to that, yes.
And that by that, you mean that you haven't been through serology at SID?
I've never been assigned there.
All right, and just so you can make it clear to the jury, at SID, there are various different places you can rotate through.
Yes.
And your rotation did not include serology.
Yes.
And what is serology?
Serology, in the serology unit, they will analyze biological fluids and sometimes tissue for genetic markers.
And sometimes that's called conventional genetic marker testing.
Yes.
That's blood type A, B, O, things of that nature.
Oral.
That's one of the tests they do.
Yes. A test called EAP, are you familiar with that one at all?
I'm not familiar with it, no.
And then, starting in January of 1995, SID began doing DNA testing.
I'm not sure when they started.
Well, are you aware that at some point in time, SID began doing a form of DNA testing in 1994?
I'm not aware of when our DNA program started.
When I say that your lab do it, I meant that it's actually done in-house by analysts from the Los Angeles Police Department laboratory. We're clear on that.
Yes.
All right. As opposed to collecting samples that would be then sent out to other laboratories for DNA testing.
Yes.
And to your knowledge, prior to 1994, had the Los Angeles Police Department collected samples and sent them out to other laboratories for DNA testing?
Sustained.
Now, at any time in 1994, had people from the Los Angeles Police Department Crime Lab given a lecture to you on procedures for collecting evidence that would subsequently be subjected to DNA testing?
Prior to 1994,
Well, during 1994.
I never received that training, no.
Prior to 1994, did you receive any training on how to collect samples that would subsequently be subjected to DNA testing?
Brief training, yes.
And who gave you this brief training?
I don't recall.
Was it, do you know who Erin Riley is?
Yes, I do.
And is she the most experienced DNA analyst at the LAPD Crime Lab?
I don't know who the most experienced person is.
Well, she would be the most experienced in the, do you know what the PCR or polymerase chain reaction method is?
It's irrelevant. It's beyond the scope of this witness's expertise.
Oral. Do you know what that
I
is?
can't go into any detail on it. I
But if-
know it's one of the procedures. There's 2 procedures, and that's one of them.
One of them, PCR, what's known as PCR?
Yes.
And to your knowledge, is that the one that the Los Angeles Police Department Crime Lab began in sometime in 1994 to do in-house?
Again, I don't keep up abreast with the DNA program.
And the other method is sometimes known as RFLP. Have you heard that term?
I've heard the term.
Standing for Restriction Fragment Length Polymorphism. Have you heard that term?
I haven't heard that term, no.
In terms of the differences between the PCR testing and the RFLP testing, do you know anything about the differences between those methods?
Just very limited knowledge.
Well, you say you don't recall your brief lecture on how to collect samples for purposes of future DNA testing.
Sustained.
But you don't know who gave you that lecture?
I don't recall who gave it, no.
Was it, would it refresh your recollection, is it Greg Matheson?
It may have been.
He's the head of serology?
Yes. He is
Was
the head of, or he was head of serology.
Michelle Kessler?
I'm pretty sure it was not Michelle Kessler.
She's the head of the laboratory?
Yes, she is.
Could it have been a gentleman named Harry Klan?
No, it was not Harry.
You know who he is?
Yes, I know.
He's
Criminals Club.
another analyst, DNA analyst in serology?
He was.
He's not there now?
I think he's assigned to a different.
Now, in your brief lecture about collection of evidence for purposes of DNA testing, did anybody ever tell you that the ability to perform successful DNA analysis on biological evidence recovered from a crime scene depends very much on the kinds of specimens collected and how they were preserved?
Seems that's not an evidence, Your Honor.
Oral.
I've heard something to that effect, yes.
Were you told that the technique used to collect and document such evidence, the quantity and type of evidence that should be packaged, and how the evidence should be preserved are some of the critical points for a forensic DNA testing program? Were you told anything to that effect?
Oral. Were you told something like that, Mr. Fung?
To the last part of his question, I don't recall being told something like that.
Were you told anything to the effect that if evidence is improperly packaged, cross-contamination can occur?
Not at that training, no.
No special emphasis on that in your brief DNA lecture.
Not that I can recall.
Were you told that if DNA evidence is not properly preserved, that decomposition and deterioration may well occur?
Not at that lecture, no.
And were you told that the decomposition or degradation of DNA evidence can seriously affect the outcome of DNA typing?
I don't recall that being discussed.
Were you ever shown a set of guidelines for the collection and preservation of DNA evidence that was produced by the Federal Bureau of Investigation?
Yes, I've been shown that.
All right. I asked, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Is this the document that,
Sure.
now you say you've been shown a book entitled Guidelines for the Collection and Preservation of DNA Evidence?
I believe it's a leaflet, but yes.
Leaflet. And when were you shown that?
That was shown to me maybe a couple weeks ago, by a couple weeks ago.
Who showed it to you?
Mr. Goldberg.
So, in other words, Mr. Goldberg showed you the guidelines for the collection and preservation of DNA evidence long after you collected the evidence in this case.
It seems a fact not evidence that there's only one set of guidelines.
Sustain. Rephrase the question.
Mr. Goldberg showed you the guidelines for the collection and preservation of DNA evidence produced by the FBI long after you did the collection in this case.
Yes,
And one of the authors of this is Dr. Henry Lee, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Now, do you know how much DNA would be contained in 1 microliter of blood?
No.
Do you know what a microliter is?
I believe it's 1 to the -6 liters.
And in terms of what a microliter of blood would look like, would you not agree that it would be about the size of a pinhead?
This is beyond the scope of this witness's expertise.
Overruled. On that ground.
It's also beyond the scope of direct and relevant.
Sustain.
Well, do you know whether 1 microliter of blood would be enough to do a DNA test using the RFLP method?
Same objections.
Sustain.
Were you given any instruction with respect to how much blood could be used in a successful DNA test?
Same objections, Your Honor.
Overruled.
Yes,
And
briefly.
were you told that as little as 1 microliter or a pinhead of blood could produce a result with an RFLP test?
I wasn't told that.
Were you told it could produce a result with a PCR test?
The training I recall did not discuss PCR or RFLP.
Were you told that minute particles of blood that you can't even see with the naked eye could be recovered from items of evidence and then used in a DNA test, be it PCR or RFLP?
I wasn't told that, no.
Were you warned that it is very important to make sure that minute particles of blood are not spread from one item of evidence to the other, especially when you're going to do subsequent DNA testing?
No.
Were you instructed that if one just wet a finger, rubbed it on a podium such as this, then wiped it with a cloth, that an extraction from that cloth could successfully be amplified and used in a DNA test?
Sustained. Sustained. Yours to disregard the implication of that question.
Do you know whether cells from a small cut from your finger transferred onto a piece of evidence could be a source in a subsequent DNA test from the evidence you touch?
Do you have any training regarding this, Mr. Fung?
No.
Do you have any knowledge about that? This
You-
particular issue?
Not expert knowledge, no.
All right,
Are
proceed.
you- Well, you're going out and collecting the evidence here, are you not?
Yes.
Now, I'd like to explore with you the little knowledge that you have.
Sustained.
Well, how would you describe, I'm sorry, you say limited?
Yes.
I'm sorry. The limited knowledge. Were you taught anything about the dangers of contamination, cross-contaminating samples, when collecting it for purposes of DNA testing?
Not for DNA testing, no.
Now, you told us on direct examination that you wear gloves, at least for one purpose, withdraw. You told us on direct examination that one purpose of wearing gloves during the collection of evidence is for your own protection.
Yes.
Do you not regard it also as important to wear gloves as a measure to prevent contamination of the samples that you're collecting?
Yes.
That's another purpose,
Yes.
an important purpose.
It is a purpose.
Now, you were asked on direct examination how you decide when to change gloves. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And you recall that you answered that when the gloves get dirty, or I have to use some of my instruments or personal items, I will remove the gloves so as not to contaminate myself or other items of evidence.
Yes.
Now, when you say that the gloves get dirty and then you remove them, that means that you can see something on the gloves.
Yes.
And you've received no instruction that samples can be contaminated for purposes of DNA testing through minute particles of blood that one cannot see.
Sustained.
Has anybody told you that samples that are being collected for purposes of DNA testing can be cross-contaminated by minute particles of blood that cannot be seen?
No.
Have you been told that evidence that is being collected for purposes of DNA testing can be contaminated by other cellular material that is so minute one cannot see other than blood?
Sustained.
I'm asking if has anybody's ever told him that.
But we've already established the extent of this training, Mr. Scheck.
Okay. Now, There is no rule in the collection of evidence for purposes of DNA testing at LAPD that gloves should be changed between each sample.
There's no rule to that, no.
And you did not change gloves between the collection of each sample, did you?
Not that I can recall, no.
And you did not instruct Ms. Mazzola to change her gloves between the collection of each sample.
That's correct.
And you know that she did not change her gloves between the collection of each sample.
From reviewing the videotapes, yes.
Now, you did receive a handout on the how to collect evidence, which included references to DNA testing, did you not?
I don't know what you're referring to.
Do you recall receiving a handout that was given to criminalists with respect to the collection and preservation of body fluids?
I don't recall having received something like that.
Well, let me show you a document of 3 pages. And it has to be marked collectively, defendants next to me.
1084.
You said 1084, Your Honor?
Yes, 1084.
Have you seen those documents before, sir?
No.
You were never handed out these 3 pages with respect to procedures for the collection and preservation of body fluids.
I don't recall having been given that, no.
Do you recall receiving any lectures at any time on how to collect and preserve body fluids from anyone at the LAPD crime lab?
I had on-the-job training.
All right. And in that on-the-job training, were you given instructions on how to use cloth swatches for the collection of bloodstains at a crime scene?
Yes.
I mean, you participated in the creation of all those boards, did you not, that laid out the procedure?
Yes.
And when you went through those boards, did you go over those procedures carefully with people from the crime lab?
Not from the crime lab, no.
Well, who'd you go over with?
Myself, Criminals Mazzola, and Mr. Goldberg.
Did you ever go through any of these procedures with Mr. Yamauchi?
I did not, no.
Mr. Yamauchi is an analyst that works at the LAPD crime lab,
Yes, he is.
and you know him as being the analyst that did some of the DNA testing in this case.
Yes.
And you've discussed with him your testimony in this case,
Yes.
and you've gone over some of the details with him.
Limited.
Now, in terms of, were you ever told, with respect to procedures,
Your Honor, the report for
All right, with the report, please. All right, Mr. Scheck, do you need to be there for some particular good reason? You going to show him anything?
I may show him this document at some point to
Why
refresh
don't you
his
use the
recollection.
podium until you need to?
Okay. Now, as I understand it, sir, you're saying you never received a written handout on how to collect and preserve body fluids, which would include blood, right?
I never received that handout, no.
Okay. But you did receive instruction orally.
Yes,
It's sort of the oral tradition in the laboratory in terms of training people.
yes,
And in terms of your training on how to collect and preserve a blood stain, part of it was you were told orally by someone to use a cloth swatch or a cloth strip or threads removed from a swatch.
yes,
And you were told that the choice of the size of the swatch depends on the size of the stain that's to be collected.
yes,
And you were told that one should dampen the swatch with distilled water and remove the excess water by shaking it off.
I don't recall that being specifically,
You were told to apply the dampened swatch to the dried stain,
yes,
to press it into the stain using tweezers.
yes,
Were you instructed orally not to rub the stain with the swatch?
no,
Let me show you this document, see if it refreshes your recollection as to whether or not you were ever told that one should not rub the stain with the swatch.
No. There's no showing this witness this recollection refreshed.
Sustain.
All right. Do you think somebody might have told you that one should not rub the stain with the swatch?
I don't recall anybody telling me not to rub.
Well, is it that you don't, is that you have no specific memory of exactly the instructions you were given on how to pick up the stain?
That's correct.
All right. Let me now show you the document, see if it refreshes your recollection.
No, you need to ask a foundational question before you do that.
One more?
Yep.
All right. Do you remember one way or the other whether anybody ever told you not to rub the stain with the swatch?
Your Honor, this is asked and answered.
Sustain. Would it refresh your recollection, Mr. Fung, to look at this document that's been shown to you, whether or not you received any instruction regarding rubbing of a blood sample in its collection?
No,
Proceed.
No? Thank you. Were you told to place the swatch, once the stain had been removed, with the transferred stain, into a plastic bag for transportation,
yes,
and to put the plastic bag in a coin envelope with appropriate information on it?
yes,
Now, have you read anywhere else in the Los Angeles Police Department manual that one should not use a plastic bag for the transportation of wet bloodstains or wet items?
I don't recall that being in the manual.
I'm talking about now the Los Angeles Police Department manual.
The manual, the LAPD manual. I don't recall that.
Do you recall section 525.20, preserving wet stains?
No,
All right. Do you recall any section of the Los Angeles Police Department manual that says items containing wet blood, semen, or chemical stain shall be permitted to dry at room temperature before packaging? Plastic containers or plastic wrap shall not, in italics, be used as packaging material.
recall something to that effect, yes.
Show you this document, see if it refreshes your recollection.
Where, here?
Here.
Yes.
Now, I think you indicated that,
I just have a check along with counsel to make sure that
I think you indicated that you were familiar with,
hang on one moment.
Yes.
you were familiar with a gentleman named Barry Fisher,
Yes.
and who is he?
Barry Fisher is the, I think he's the director of the LA Sheriff's Office, Crime Lab.
And and you indicated that you were familiar with at least one of the editions of his book, Techniques of Crime Scene Investigation?
I have looked at certain sections of one of the editions, yes.
Which sections?
I don't recall all the sections I've looked at.
Well, do you recall looking at any sections with respect to the collection and preservation of evidence?
Your Honor, it's vague as to which edition of the book he's talking about. What?
I said overruled, but at this point it is. He hasn't asked a question regarding the book yet. Premature. Proceed.
Could you repeat the question?
Yes. What you said you were familiar with some sections of this book, Techniques of Crime Scene Investigation, some edition, correct?
Yes.
Right. Which sections are you familiar with?
Again, I don't recall every section that I've read out of that book.
Do you recall if you read any sections dealing with the collection of evidence?
It's still vague at this point as to what edition of the book he's talking about.
Overruled.
The whole book deals with collection of evidence.
Do you remember reading any section of the book that concerned collection of evidence of wet stains and putting them in plastic bags?
I don't recall reading something like that, no.
That wasn't in your edition?
I don't recall if it was or not.
I have a moment, Your Honor. Do you recall are you familiar with a book called Criminalistics, An Introduction to Forensic Science by Richard Saperstein?
I am familiar with one of the editions, yes.
All right. And this is a book that I take it you studied when in your training, criminalistics?
Yes,
It's fundamental text in the field?
one of them.
All right. Now, do you recall in this book any discussion about packaging bloodstain evidence in plastic or airtight containers?
Your Honor, it assumes that this witness has read this particular version of this book.
Overruled.
Member of the-
In any of the editions that you read?
It may have been, but I don't recall.
May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
Call your attention to this page of what is the fourth edition of Criminalistics, An Introduction to Forensic Science by Richard Saperstein. Ask you to read that paragraph and see if it refreshes your recollection.
You may. Mrs. Robertson?
Yes. Now, this book, Criminalistics, An Introduction to Forensic Science, whatever edition you read, is this a text that you considered in forming your opinions as a criminalist in your testimony in this case?
Could you repeat that again?
Sure. Is this book part of the training that you underwent, which came to be a part of the basis for which you used in offering your opinions as a criminalist in this case?
Certain portions of it.
It's vague as to which opinions.
I think he said the answer was certain portions.
Opinions. I assume we're going to work down to what it is.
Right. Now, which portions did you rely upon or did you consider in forming your opinions as a criminalist in your testimony in this case?
Your Honor, this seems to pack on evidence that he's offered what we typically consider an expert opinion.
Oh, well,
Which portions?
I don't recall what specific portions.
Well, would it include discussion of collection of bloodstains? Wouldn't the things that Safarstein said in his book with respect to the collections of bloodstains be data that you considered in forming your judgments in this case about how to collect bloodstains?
Your Honor, that assumes a fact on evidence that he's talking about the collection of bloodstains as opposed to final packaging.
oh, well.
This is something I did consider, yes.
And doesn't Safarstein say that the packaging of blood evidence in a plastic or airtight containers must be avoided because the accumulation of residual moisture could contribute to the growth of blood-destroying bacteria and fungi?
Hearsay under 721, also ambiguous as to whether he's talking about final packaging or.
Oh, well.
Preferably, each stained article should be packaged separately in a paper bag or well-ventilated box.
That's what the book says.
Now, do you agree with that, sir?
I agree with that in the regard for final packaging. In the intermediate stage, I do not agree with that.
So in other words, for temporary packaging, it's okay to put a wet blood stain in plastic?
Well, it's vague as to the word packaging.
Oh, well.
Please repeat it.
Sure. So is it your position that it's sound practice to put a wet blood stain in a plastic bag temporarily?
That's the way I was taught and trained to do it in the Los Angeles Police Department, yes.
Right. So it's fair to say that you were taught in the Los Angeles Police Department to put wet blood stains in plastic bags when packaging them.
Wait a minute, that misstates the testimony. There's
Overruled.
collection and packaging. Those are
Overruled.
things.
That's what
Counsel-
you were taught.
Counsel,
Sorry.
remember the direction on how objections should be made. Proceed.
That's what you were taught.
No, that's not what I was taught.
Weren't you taught to, when collecting these swatches, all right, containing blood that are wet, to put them in plastic bags?
Yes.
And isn't that contrary to what you learned from Safarstein and others as to sound practices with respect to packaging wet stains?
My interpretation of what Mr. Safarstein wrote is that they should not be booked in, or they should not be packaged in plastic for in a final state.
Well, is there anything, to your knowledge, in this book that indicates that it's okay to you to package a wet blood stain in plastic, even temporarily?
It's overly broad, Your Honor, the entire book.
Overruled.
I don't think the book addresses it.
Well, to the extent the book addresses it, it says, don't put wet blood stains in plastic.
Misstates the evidence.
Sustained.
Saperstein says, the packaging of blood-stained evidence in plastic or airtight containers must be avoided. True?
Yes.
And it doesn't say must be avoided in the long term. It says must be avoided, period, right?
Your Honor, it's argumentative.
Sustained.
Now, a plastic bag is a package, isn't it, sir?
Argumentative.
Overruled.
It can be considered packaging, yes.
And Saperstein says, don't put wet bloodstains in plastic packaging, right?
Misstates the evidence.
Overruled.
Oh, excuse me, go ahead. Could you restate it?
Saperstein says, don't put wet bloodstains in plastic packages, right?
Misstates the evidence.
Overruled.
My interpretation of what he says in that regard is towards final packaging.
Are you familiar with Forensic Science, An Introduction to Criminalistics by DeForest, Ganslin, and Dr. Henry Lee?
I have looked at portions of that book, yes.
All right. And do you recall what these gentlemen say about packaging wet bloodstains in plastic?
Not specifically, no.
All right. You read some edition of this book?
If the cover hasn't changed, it's probably that edition.
Probably this edition. And you considered this book in forming your opinions as a criminalist with respect to testimony that you've given in this case?
Yes.
I'd like to show you now. Page
One more, Your Honor.
Certainly.
I call your attention on page 245 to this paragraph,
This entire paragraph?
the whole paragraph of that sentence. Now, the section you've just read is a section entitled Collection, Preservation, and Packaging of Blood Evidence.
Yes.
And do not these authors say that garments bearing wet or moist blood stains should never, and the never is in bold, be sealed in airtight containers such as plastic bags. Under such conditions, the specimens retain their moisture, encouraging bacterial growth.
That's what it says.
Now, Mr. Fung, the danger, would you not agree, of packaging a wet bloodstain in a plastic bag is this problem of bacterial growth.
It promotes bacterial growth, yes.
And what bacteria does when it begins to form in, let's say, a wet stain in a plastic bag, is it will begin, the bacteria will begin to eat away at the DNA.
It will begin to degrade it.
Yes, the term degrade. Could you tell the jury what the term degrade means?
Degrade, in that sense, means that the genetic proteins or DNA is broken down by the bacteria.
Is it sort of a situation like if you put like milk being spoiled when it's left out for a long time, the bacteria begins to form within it? That be an analogy that you think would be appropriate? Souring milk?
It's a rough analogy.
Okay. And would you not agree, sir, that when biological materials such as wet bloodstains begin to degrade through bacterial contamination, that there is greater danger of cross-contaminating those degraded samples than if the samples had not been degraded?
It's unintelligible, Your Honor.
Now, let me rephrase that because it is unintelligible. I'm sorry.
Sustained.
Sustained and self-censored.
Yes, sustained.
Uh,
I was just reading it myself here.
Right. Let's start it this way. Let us assume that we started with a one of these red swatches, such as you took from the Bundy crime scene, and the sample was not degraded. You with me?
Gotcha.
And then, through the process of collection and handling, one got, let's say, blood from another sample and accidentally touched or cross-contaminated the sample you picked up. Are you with me?
So I have a sample collected, and another sample touched the first
That's right.
sample.
Right.
Gotcha.
It's that concept we were talking about before of a secondary transfer or cross-contamination.
Okay.
Now, if the sample that you had collected was degraded, right?
Which sample was that?
The sample you originally collected, let us assume it is put in a plastic bag. It is left for 7 or 8 hours, that it is left in a heated condition, and that that sample is subjected to bacterial contamination. You with me?
Yes.
And that bacterial contamination would begin to eat away at the original DNA in that sample.
Your Honor, this is beyond the scope of direct expertise, and at this point it's impossible to follow the hypothetical.
Overruled.
I don't know at what point the bacteria will start to eat away.
Well, at some point, you agree, bacterial contamination will degrade samples.
At some point.
All right? And let us assume for purposes of this hypothetical that if you left a wet blood stain in a plastic bag for 7 hours, that there would be substantial degradation of the original DNA in that stain. Are you with me on this?
This is hypothetical.
Yes.
I'm trying to check this is a proper hypothetical.
Sustained.
Your Honor, I'm just trying to set up a step. Would you agree, sir, that a blood stain which has been degraded through bacterial contamination such that some or most or all of the original DNA has been destroyed is a sample that can be easily cross-contaminated with a